The Norse do not recognize Advent, not Lent or any other of our holy days. To them, if it is a good time to raid, it is a good time to raid. They stop for July though. Osrith nodded. She had been with the Thurgilsons when they and their army had stopped at midwinter for this festival. Games, good food, song. It seemed like a good time had been had by them all, and now, with that time long gone, she could look back at it with fondness. It had not been fondness at the time, thought, they having fled Caerliguilid, with who knew what sort of welcome when, if, she had got to Dunnottar. And from their higher vantage point, Osrith could see yet more Norse attaching themselves to the main body, small, sporadic fighting beginning at the edges of the groups, though neither commander, a tall, thin man with dirty, long hair for the Norse, nor Ethelfled for the temporarily united Saxons, had issued a command to engage. A group of Gwyned's army had migrated to Osrith's left. A commander called over in Cymbric, and Angus answered, giving his status. The captain bowed and saluted, and Osrith's men joined with them. Osrith dug her boots into the malleable soil. This was it. They were not as far forward as she might have hoped, for all knew the weakest fought at the back of a shield wall. But they could not jostle forward for the density of men, all buoyant with battle readiness as they saw their lady ride up and down the lines. And still they had not engaged. Osrith looked around when she felt a hand on her shoulder. Next to her, Elfrith turned too, and Eswi. It was Pylig. You cannot be a part of this, Pylig insisted. He looked at her men. Have you not told her this? Do you tell the Lady Ethelfled what to do, even if you think she could be better served with different advice? Miral's voice was thick and strong, and he smiled across to Osrith. It was her choice, he was telling her, and there would be no shame if she quit the field. At the far end of the field Wessex banners were held high, and amongst them one's displaying the red dragon. Hywel was with the West Saxons then, as was Idwell. Not Gwynedd, but declaring his lot in line with his allegiance. Pylig, listen to me, Osrith implored. Only you will steeper to side with Miral, to unite with Ethelfled against the Norse, who would be far worse than any Anglish or Saxon. Did Britons not invite the Saxons to this land? Yet none of us invited the Danes and Norse. Flancina successfully repels them from Ian because the Irish are more of one mind than are we. She waved her hand to the river. I was never a part of this, not Constantine's murmurs. We cannot leave, for the river is blockaded. To the left of them, there was more fighting, Wessex banners flying in the face of Ethelfled's goose of Werburgh. Whom do we fight, Osrith? Elfrith asked. The bloody West Saxons are fighting the Mersons. Ethelfled has just given a speech about how united we are. I thought they had come to help us. Where do we stand? We asked, in Gaelish. Exactly where we are, Osrith told them. Who do we all have as a common enemy? She asked this in Gaelish, Anglish and Cymbric. Norse, came the reply, even from the grey-cloaked men of Gwynedd, and Osrith ignored Egelfrith's cry of the Welsh. Do not do this, Pylig asked again, and he spoke quickly to Miral, who then stepped across to Osrith, speaking low to her. If the Alba Mormers will take orders from me, he proposed to Osrith, in your place, will you retire? The banging of Norse shields began again. They would begin soon, and still Ethelfled held. Yes, she agreed, and told Phelim and Angus this. Angus took a step towards her and placed a hand over her stomach. We have to take you back alive, and unharmed, he told her. If we were to all die here, Constantine will kill us. He looked at Pylig and tried Saxon. Our taking of her fortress? Yes, nodded Pylig. And Angus raised his blade to Miral, touching his steel with his. After a second, Eswi and Phelim did the same, and then all of the warriors. Together, a union of warriors. Osrith's men. She turned under Pylig's gesture and looked at the fortress. A figure, small but watchful, was on the ramparts. Miral stepped to her. I kept it safe for you, he said, and dropped her coin into her hands, the thin chain slipping around her fingers. Alfred's and Ceolf's images looking back to her, and he slipped it over her neck. Give it to the child. It clearly means a lot to you. And when she had placed her hand on Miral's forearm and shaken it firmly in reassurance for the battle ahead, She saw Finan. Miral saw him too, and his demeanor changed. He pushed past Pylig and strode up to him, blocking the Irishman's path. "You are the bastard that beat her and left her." Miral snarled. At that, Phelim drew his sword. "Bastard Alade," he said in Irish. Finan glanced past Phelim, and looked at Osrith, his eyes lighting on the coin she was wearing. "Anything that you would like me to tell your brother before battle?" Finan asked, ignoring the warriors. It was a concession, but at least she would be speaking to him. "Tell him I am glad the blade restored him a Dehu bath." At this, Finan gave her a look of hope. "I am thankful," she continued, "for I have another chance to thrash his ass." "Bibbenberg," Osrith prompted, her words in contrast to the softness in her heart, and they were the only things preventing her from tearing to his arms. "You burned his charters," he reminded her. "They will be rewritten," Osrith said. "They probably already have been, but you know and I know it is not what is on paper that matters but what can be won by strength." She had stepped away from Pylig now and was standing next to Miral, who was holding his ground. "Osrith, come with," Finan began, but she put a hand to his mouth. "I will wait for you to come for us," Osrith reiterated. "God willing, the plan is Ilba. I am safe there, from conniving and politics." And knew then all was lost, for the pain in his face betrayed the fact that he would never leave Utad. Still, it was what they had agreed and she felt she had to say it. She felt a breath by her face. It was Phelim, the usually reserved Pitlander. His sword was raised, as were the swords of the rest of her men, and Osrith felt weak. No, not now. Why had he had to come over now? "Picts," Finan said in his disgust, glaring at the Morma. "They eat children." It was a hard winter and a harder battle season. Phelim protested, and a hand clapped him on the shoulder. "That is a bad rumor," Elfrith replied, grinning at Phelim. "It was just the twice, if you believe the stories. We were all once pagans," put in Eswi, glaring at Finan. "But it was no worse than sacrificing men to the bogs." But Osrith shook her head. "We will be just here if you want us to fillet the bastard," Engus told her, his Gaelish somewhat better than his Saxon, and, with the exception of Miral, the men retreated. "What are Strathclyde Britons doing down here in Mercia?" "No more sheep left to hump," Finan shouted, but then looked at Osrith and his face changed and a barrier holding Osrith back dissolved, and she smiled to the man she loved dearest in the whole world. "Osrith, I love ye," Finan told her and reached for her hand. Osrith let him take it, and he wrapped his other one around it, too. "I am going somewhere safe to have the child," she told him. "There are people, good people who can help me at the time," she added. A cry came from over by the West Saxons and Osrith knew that the battle should have started by now. Men were getting testy and irking one another. "I will wait for you," she added. "I will be with you when you come for me." And again, Osrith saw the pained look on his face. "Our child will be safe," she reiterated. Next to her, Miral folded his arms, glaring at Finan. "In the court of that Gaelish cocksure bastard Constantine?" Finan scorned, loudly, so that the Picts, Engus and Phelim, and Eswi the Gael, could hear him, and then his voice softened. "It is a good choice," he told her. "Come with me, now?" Osrith asked him in Gaelish, panic filling her. What if she never saw him again? Finan said nothing, did nothing, and Osrith made to turn. As she did so, Finan took a step towards her, and pulled her to him, kissing her full on the lips, supporting her back, holding her close. And when they broke apart, Osrith's knees gave way. The day had been too much and blackness encroached around the peripheries of her vision. Pylig was there, and scooped her up, looking at the horror on Finan's face. From behind Miral, their warriors piled around, but it was Miral who landed a punch into Finan's jaw, and the usually agile Ulsterman caught the full force. "She is only fainted," Pylig called, but Miral had raised a six between him and Finan, Osrith's warriors piling in behind their temporary captain. "If she dies," Miral began, but Finan looked across to Osrith, who had looped an arm around Pylig's neck. "Dies? She is old to be a mother, it is dangerous." The words were Sifix and he took his friend's shoulder. "I have known women to give birth at her age," he tried to reassure her, and it was Finan now, his obvious feelings for Osrith, that kept Miral from attempting to attack him, and he lowered his Sikhs. "I will go to her," Finan confessed, as Miral let them remove themselves back to Utad. "Do not tell him, please," Sihik Finan implored. "When he has reclaimed Bibbenberg, then." He turned suddenly and watched Bialik traverse the ground towards Brunanbur's outer gate. "I have seen her to be an honorable woman. She commands respect of men to follow her to battle. She is a formidable fighter," Sihik reassured him, as they fell into battle line next to Osfith and Berg. "If only she and Utad, if only she and Utad what?" Their lord stood between them, defying them to keep silent about where they had been. "Nothing, lord," Sihik said, and glanced at the Norse lines to be away from Utad's accusing stare. "And where is my daughter?" 88,888,888. Stjora was on the other side of the gate when Pilig brought back Osrith and closed the gate. The ground looked firm again, and Osrith wondered why she had been brought back there, when her men were in the middle lines. Good, part of her mind thought, vaguely. They are in the middle lines. No man wants to admit being at the back. And she saw Pilig pull the gate closed behind her and demanded Osrith bar it from inside. "May God go with you, and my men," she called to Pilig, but had no idea if she had been heard, for, "I am stuck here too, aunt." A voice came from the rampart walkway, and as she looked up, saw it was Stjora. She sounded grumpy and her eyes were fixed out into the sea of men. Come up here. Watch the battle with me," Stjora called. "I would rather not," Osrith said, and supported herself on the beam. Stjora shrugged, but narrowed her eyes for a moment as she saw Osrith's way. "Here is some water," Stjora called, and dropped a leather skin onto the ground beside Osrith. "My thanks," Osrith called back, and it was exactly what she needed. The day had been long and she had already been standing for several hours at her trial, and had last drunk something, goat milk, at dawn. "What is his name, the man you look for?" Osrith asked. It was always a safe question, and if the person Osrith asked it have denied an answer, fair enough. Mostly it yielded results, and the result from Stjora was, Sigtryggr, the leader of the Norse. "We are betrothed," Stjora said, confidently. "And your father knows about this?" "Oh no," Stjora replied, brightly. "But he will come around." And the battle began at last. Although Osrith had come to sit with her niece, she looked away. Too many people she cared about fought that day. She sat with her back to the rampart wall as Stjora surveyed the battlefield. 88,888,888. Darkness was beginning to threaten, but the lack of light was not going to be the reason that the battle had come to a halt. The Norse had been repelled, with many Saxons pushing them, confidently, back towards the Merse. As if waiting for an invisible clue, Utad's daughter sprang to her feet. "My thanks for your company today, aunt," Stjora said to Osrith. "I do hope that your baby is born well, and that you live." Osrith jerked her head. Not at Stjora's words, blunt though they were, but at the fact that the young woman was now beginning to hoist herself over the ramparts and was hand-holding her way down the wooden joint beams that stuck out from the wooden wall. "Where are you going?" Osrith called over the top of the wall. Stjora looked up to her. "Sigtryggr," she said, simply. And before Osrith could get down the rampart steps, Stjora had managed to get to ground level and was running, pell-mell, through the dead and the dying. Osrith managed to heave the rampart gate bar out of its holding struts, and it was now far heavier than it had been when she had pushed it into place. Finally, on the other side, she saw her brother's daughter make a direct line for the Norse ships. Someone was waiting for her, Sigtryggr perhaps. Too tired to curse, Osrith ran after her, buoy in her hand without any conscious thought of her actually drawing the blade. She would be damned if Utad thought Stjora's flight was anything to do with her. And then Osrith stopped. A figure rose from the ground and had his arm raised, a spear in it. Now she was going to see her niece die, for Stjora had seemingly not seen the assailant. But someone had. It was Berg, the man Osrith had noticed as one of Utad's men. He had asked for his life to be spared when Ronvald raided Deheubarth, and Street David's monastery. It took a few moments for Osrith to catch up to the ship, but a fog was descending and she could not run. The direction of the river was lost to her. She stopped. What now? Well, she would have to go back and hope that someone believed her. Utad, of course, would assume Osrith had done this out of spite. Then she heard her men's voice came first out of the thickness of the mist, and she heard him telling us that there was food aplenty aboard. Are we on the right ship? Engus's voice filtered through the fog, dissipating through it, so it came to her ears much softer than usual. Who cares? Eswe said. We have food. Let us go with the Norse. We will be able to leave the Merce then. There was no question that Osrith was going to be left behind. Who could have hoped to try and find her in this? They could sail to safety and then come back to Brunanburh another day, for it had been a Mercian win, after all, and the fortress was not breached. Osrith stumbled onwards, using Buey to feel ahead of her and found the boat. Feel him? Osrith tried, for she had not heard this man's voice yet. Lady Osrith? He was there. So all three of her warriors from Alba were aboard. Help me up, will you? She asked, and a hand appeared in the fog. The bank was higher near this side of the river, so the distance up to the taffrail was quite short, but even so, the distance was large enough that she needed Felim's strength to lift her some of the way by her armpits. Engus? Eswe? Osrith asked, and could vaguely see her murmurs in the fog. Osrith, Eswe declared, and crossed to her. We are pleased to see you. We don't think it's ours, Engus told her, guiding her to the rear of the ship and handing her a fleece. Then again, the one we had was not ours, either. Gales, Osrith heard someone say, from far at the prow of the ship. It was in Norse, but there was little movement. There was, however, scurrying below, for this was a ship, not a boat, and it had more than one level. Norse were on the ship too. There are people with us, Osrith hissed to Eswe, as he sat next to her for a moment. On this ship? We know, he replied. We are waiting for them to identify themselves. Who is on the foremast? Felim, we think. But it is being rowed, and it is none of us. 88,888,888. Dusk was coming upon them, and the ship was under way. How that was possible, Osrith did not know, but it seemed like Felim and Engus were angling the sail enough to fill it, while at the same time unknown Norse were using oars to get them through the straits between the Wirral and the north bank of the Merce. It was ridiculous, for none of them had openly acknowledged the other, and Osrith closed her eyes for a moment, before looking at the west coast of the Wirral until it disappeared in fog and darkness. Suddenly the ship shuddered, and slowed. What was that? It felt as if someone had thrown over an anchor. Nighttime and they could not sail, so it made sense. Osrith curled up in the sheepskin and slept. It was Eswe's face Osrith saw first the next morning, one of silently strangled horror, for the second face she saw was that of a Norseman. He had a spear to Eswe's back, and it was clear that, in the dawnlight, the Norseman had told Eswe to wake her. His name is Sigtigr. Eswe told Osrith, who made to get up, but was stayed by a spear pointing at her too. Similarly, behind Eswe, Engus and Felim were similarly threatened. Shadowkin is with you? Osrith asked, quickly, glancing around. She had seen her niece be saved from death by Berg, but had she made it to him? How do you know about Shadowkin? Sigtigr asked, suspiciously. Behind him, a small figure stood, having ascended the steps. Because she's my aunt, Shadowkin told him, handing him and the 7 other Norse bread and meat and smiling at her. After a second, she also gave some to Osrith. You followed me, then? I followed you, she told Shadowkin. I did not know you were on this boat, though. The fog was thick. And she then translated the Norse for Engus, Felim and Eswe's benefit. We must go back, Osrith told her. I will not have your father blame me, after everything else he blames me for. No, Sigtigr shouted, his long hair curtaining on both sides of his head. Shadowkin is coming with me, back to Dublin. I don't care what Ragnall is going to do, I am staying there. Ragnall? Osrith thought, and remembered tell of 2 brothers, Ivarson brothers, from Dublin. So Ragnall wanted to invade Mercia, or Northumbria. Osrith would bet all the wealth she had on guessing Eoforwick. Yes, agreed Osrith. Go to Dublin. We wish to remove to Alba in any case. Perhaps we can work together. You have very good Norse for a Saxon, Sigtryggr said. I am many things, but not a Saxon, Osrith told him, and her hand felt for a jewel, Eric's jewel, which was still in her hair. I spent several months with a Northman once, and he taught me your language. But the leader of the Norse shook his head. We are not going to Alba, scoffed Sigtryggr. We only have let you live so far because we did not have enough hands to manage this ship. And Osrith tested her Alba comrade's knowledge of the Northman language by getting to her feet, so Sigtryggr could see her pregnancy. I am Krejikvind, she declared. In Norse, I am the prisoner of these bastard Gaels and Picts, who wish to sacrifice me and my child. And Sigtryggr threw back his head and laughed, waving to his men to lower their spears. Perhaps it had been a good move not to have challenged him with the threat of involvement of the death of his grandfather, the boneless, Osrith thought, wryly. Playing on this man's sensitive side, for he clearly had won, rather than threaten him was a good move. And Osrith saw his reply rather than heard it as the wind fell from the sails. I know you, a voice came from beside Sigtryggr. I was there, with Canute and Ragnar, at Dunham. You are Krejikvind. Osrith looked at the man, but could not place him. It had been over a decade and there had been a lot of Norse with Ragnar at Dunham. Then, you are welcome, Sigtryggr smiled. If Han vouches for you, that is good enough for me, Krejikvind. Should I do away with these men now? If they are such a threat to you, give the fish their breakfast. It was Osrith's turn to smile. There are few choices for a woman in my position, Osrith told him. I know I almost had you fooled. Perhaps, Sigtryggr replied. But we are still going to Dublin. You may depart from there, back to Alba, if that is your desired destination. A hand on his shoulder made Sigtryggr turn around. We are going to Dublin, Osrith told Engus. These Norse want to go home. Good news, Engus told her, and Eswi sat next to her. We accounted for all of your mercen men, Eswi told her. When Felim spotted the ship, they were all alive, at least, that is what I saw. Good, Osrith said, refusing to let her mind wander to the next logical step. Next to her on the other side, Stjora sat, eating some bread, her eyes barely straying from the Norse leader. And is it yours? Osrith asked of Stjora, who had come to sit by her. Do you wish to go to Dublin? Yes, Stjora said, happily. My father will understand. He will come round. And Osrith got to her feet then, and approached Sigtryggr. My men will help you get back home, Osrith told him, but there are two conditions. The tall Norseman turned to her, and inclined his head. For a moment, Ivar the Boneless stood before her, just before Domhnall struck him down. Name them, he said. We will need a craft, a ship, a boat, to get us back to Alba, she began. And? Prompted Sigtryggr. We must make a detour, go somewhere on the way. An image of Dyfnwal appeared in Osrith's mind, and then of his son of Anarord's daughter. Owain. Where? Niceman, she told him. A child is to be taken willingly to his kingdom, to restore a bloodline, Osrith told him. She stopped, for a man had appeared at Sigtryg's shoulder. Willingly, she agreed. We are going to Dublin, Sigtryggr told a man who had come up beside him near the Orlop, after he had said a few words to their leader that Osrith couldn't catch. Sigtryggr caught Osrith's sigh, his words deliberate. So you do not wish to go to Alba yet, Anlaf? I believe the king waits for you. He has a daughter he wishes me to marry, Anlaf said, noncommittally. But I do not wish to marry a Scot. She is no Scot, Osrith replied, stepping between the two men. Anlaf stared at Osrith, taken aback at her strong words. Oh no? Anlaf asked, his tone mocking. Culturally, yes, Edra is of Alba, and half Anglish, Osrith conceded. But her mother was Thira Ragnarsdotter, her uncle Ragnar, her grandfather Ragnar the Fearless. I am guessing you know who I mean. And why is she in Alba? It was Sigtrygg's turn to speak. Thira died in a fire, Osrith replied, and realized that for the first time in the retelling, her heart was breaking, and her eyes were filling with tears. She turned to the sea, making the most of the ship's splashing. Set by good Christian men, No doubt. Osrith turned her head. It was Chiora who had spoken, and she was standing next to Osrith. I know this story, it is a sad story, Sigtryggr. I tried to save her mother, Osrith told them, but I could not. She was delivered of a daughter, and the child was born and had no one, so I took her somewhere I knew to be safe, and have spent my life earning her keep. Osrith looked out to sea, to the north, and continued. Edru is of Alba, Injun Corsten, she added. Constantine has raised her, and considers her his own daughter. It is no matter her heritage, Sigtryggr replied. We see how Constantine is, running a policy integration, making all countries to follow our laws. Forget our Norse ways is what he means. Osrith shifted her weight. It was true they were better off with Dyfnwell, if they wished to preserve their heritage. But, that may be irrelevant, if she managed to get Sigtryggr to get her to go to Aberfraw, and to Anarod's palace. Do you know who gave me the name of Krejogvind? Osrith asked him. You all acted on it, so the name means something to you, she cautioned, then pulled a jewel from her hair, looking at its milky jewel in the morning light. Erik Thorgilson, said Anlaf. I was at Dunham too. And Osrith looked back to him. I had given Thyra's daughter all icon of her heritage, Osrith told them. She knows she is Danish. You cannot see her and fail to know she is of Thyra. At least meet her before you decide whether to ally with Constantine or Dyfnwell. I know the King of Alba will allow you to remain in the Western Isles no matter what the King of Strathclyde has told you. Anlaf stepped in front of Sigtryggr. He too must have been of the same stock, for he was tall and thin like Sigtryggr. He bent his long neck to Osrith. I will consider all you have said, Krejogvind, he told her. But not yet will we go to Alba. We sail to Atilda Ian today. But something in his eyes told Osrith he was intrigued. Tell Constantine I will return, in my own time. Osrith smiled. Here was a handsome man, a sensible man. She could at least tell Edric she had met him. When you meet Flansinan on the battlefield, Osrith said to Sigtryggr, as we moved to one side of her, tell him, tell him I live, and remember his hospitality with great fondness. So they were to Dublin. We took her shoulder, but Osrith was not ready to rest yet. To Iceman first, Osrith asked. Sigtryggr nodded his agreement. And Felim took the tiller and Angus the sail sheet, while the Norse rowed them out into the Irish Sea. Southwest first, then to the north, then to Alba, Osrith thought, as the November sun shone on them all. 88,888,888. On a high cliff stood the fortress of Aberfraw, capsule of Gwynedd unseen, if the Welsh legends were true, where Branwen wed her Irish chieftain. They had sailed through the straits between the north coast and Mun, the same high, imposing mountains to the left of them peering over the skyline, or so it seemed to Osrith, as if watching their passage. A few questions by Angus of some of the fishermen by the banks of the strait, and they learned that Aberfraw sat on the western edge of the island, looking to Eirian. And Owain had been waiting for them. How long had the young man stood there, on the shore, looking to sea? How many days? And how many days would he have? They anchored offshore, and Osrith had wondered how they would reach the strand line, for they had no boat. But Anarod had a boat, and it was being rowed out to them. Owain. Osrith had greeted him, and the boy shined his happy face to her, the same joyous one that his father had charmed Osrith with at Glashku. The boatman did not seem to want to let the boy get aboard a Norse sailing ship, but Owain said something to him, and he relented, moving aside and allowed Angus to pull him aboard. You come of your own accord? Osrith asked, as the boy's feet met the deck, and translated for all concerned. Owain nodded, which needed no translation, then added, it is good to see you, Osrith of the Hen Ogledd. As he sat at the stern, looking around at the landscape, as if he had never seen the sea or the sky or a ship before and was finding them to his liking, Osrith saw Anarod. He was standing on the beach as the ferryman took back the boat. Who is he? We asked, looking where she was looking. The King of Gwynedd, Osrith told him. I agreed to do a task for him. Him? We asked, nodded to Owain. He is the task. Osrith inhaled. Of course, they had not been with her, and did not know. You know how I was held captive by Diffenwell because he thinks he is the last of the line of the Henoled? Yes, of course, Eswe said, patiently, as the wind caught the sail. It was a southerly, a good one to butt them across the Irish Sea. Well, he was wrong, Osrith told him. He left a part of himself, shall we say, in Gwynedd when in exile. Eswe looked, and looked again. Owain was sitting quietly at the rear, and even the usually uppity Stiora was trying to talk to him. He is going to Constantine. He arranged this, Eswe said, as if all of their journey had been a puzzle, waiting to be worked out. Constantine wanted this to happen. Don't ask me how I know, but he has, and he has managed to work it all out. The bastard thinks, Osrith murmured. She had heard it said about Alfred. Yet, to Osrith, it applied even more so to Constantine. Hywel was going to reject his unification strategy, he knew that, somehow, and he knew he had to call his bluff to harden the allegiances already formed. He had already treated with Ethelfled, and she had told Osrith about the idea of a tripartite alliance. Strathclyde had been included in that alliance, and it depended on a king of Strathclyde not so embedded to the Norse. How? Osrith asked Eswe anyway, for she wanted to know his view on things, and she was unsurprised that he had an even bolder idea of Constantine's ambition. The king needs to consolidate Alba, yet the king of Strathclyde is, as ever, bent on independence. So if you raise the king, a king will have few inclinations to rebel. It made sense.